Okay, it looks like folks are getting out of their last meeting and maybe starting to pop over into this one. I know people are really busy. All right, I'm going to very slowly get started so nobody misses content, but I can start doing a little bit of the opening stuff. Welcome again. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us, the CIID team today, learning about data integration planning with the CIID Toolkit. Do you want to go to the next slide, Darren? There we go. Now everybody knows who I am. I'm Lindsay Wise. I am the CIID Tools and Products Lead, as well as a TA provider for CIID. And presenting with me today, I have my friend, Emily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Rang. I'm the CIID Intensive TA Lead and also a TA provider here with CIID.
And you can also see on your screens, Darren, right? I don't know why I just forgot his name. And Charlotte Ellis, who are helping us out today. They'll be with us in our breakout rooms and helping to facilitate the conversation. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to put those into the chat, and we will be having open discussions in the breakout rooms in a little bit. Today on the agenda, our main goal is learning about the toolkit. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the why and how of the toolkit and how it works when you are looking to integrate data. We're then going to have 2 rounds of breakout sessions where Emily and I will both share the halves of the toolkit. So I'll talk about the first half of the toolkit, and then Emily will talk about the second, more technical half, and then we'll switch. So you may be a little bit out of order, but you will learn about each step of the toolkit and have time to look at it and to ask us some questions. And then after that, we'll get together again for a little bit of time to reflect and ask questions as a large group. And then we have time set aside for the ever important evaluation. So we make sure that we are doing a good job providing information to you. Okay, so I a little bit probably alluded to our goals. Obviously, today we want you to learn more about the CIID Data Integration Toolkit. We have had a data integration toolkit posted on our website for several years, but what we've done over the last 18 months or so is take a hard look at that toolkit and apply some of the learning that we have done as states have implemented Generate, as states have gone through the process, and as we've developed tools and templates hand in hand with states, and we've applied our project management knowledge so that we have a new and improved revised toolkit to share with you today. And so we're going to dive into that and learn more about how useful it is for data integration projects and for all types of IT projects. We also really want to focus in understanding your potential role in the toolkit. So if you're from a state, which most of you probably are, what does the toolkit mean to you as a Part B data manager, or as a person who works in IT, or as a data governance coordinator? What is your role in this toolkit and in the project? So we want to really dig into that with you. And just lastly, understand how the steps and all of the tools can support any IT project, as I said before. So we think that the toolkit is perfect for Generate, but it's also excellent for lots of types of projects. All right, I'm still talking. I keep thinking it's Emily's turn. So the data integration toolkit is made up, we have 5 steps, and we'll dig into those later. And under each step, it's divided into tasks and then into the smallest unit, which is activities. And we'll look at all of those. Hopefully it will be interesting. We also have lots of tools that accompany. We'll talk about those too. We have sort of templates so that at every step of the way, the project is supported, the team is supported, documenting, planning for sustainability, and really running a project in the most efficient manner. Just to note that this toolkit is aligned with CEDS. Generate is aligned with CEDS, and you will see that throughout. I think that was everything about the toolkit that I needed to say here.
Thanks,
I'll hand it to Emily for team.
Thanks, Lindsay. So it's important as we look at the toolkit and as you are thinking about your role as we dive deeper into the toolkit, it's important for all members of state data integration teams to sort of like know the toolkit or review steps in the toolkit. Partially not just so that you recognize your role, but also how your role interacts with other roles and activities and actions related to the toolkit. So the roles and responsibilities for each state varies greatly. In some states, some folks play multiple roles shown on this diagram, and in other states there might be multiple staff individuals that serve in that capacity. So you could have multiple EdFax coordinators in a particular state, where another state has their EdFax coordinator, their data governance coordinator, and maybe IT staff are all one and the same person in some cases. So in like the early steps of the toolkit, you all as states get to sort of determine like who needs to be a part of the conversation and for which part of the work. And we try to help identify that work using various tools that Lindsay mentioned, but it helps identify what role those individuals are playing. We kind of refer to data stewards and subject matter experts according to a couple of definitions, which you'll see throughout the toolkit. So a data steward is a role that particularly requires working directly with the data, potentially implementing business rules and reviewing data quality. So somebody with more of a data focus, a subject matter expert who has the real deep knowledge of a particular program area and the requirements needed to sort of inform those business rules, and may also have some real expertise with the data, but is their primary focus is that deep program knowledge. So another example or another thing to consider as you're reviewing or thinking about and looking through the new toolkit, again, folks may play different roles. So an EdFax coordinator might also, or a Part B data manager or other positions might serve as a data steward or a subject matter expert or both. So just depending on what role they play in that particular task or that particular activity. So back to you,
Thanks,
Lindsay.
Sally. And I think when we go into the breakout rooms, we'll share a little bit more about, you guys can share your roles in the chat, and we'll dig a little deeper into that. Okay, so actually also a side note is that the new version of the toolkit went live today. I'm going to pop that in the chat right now. So if you want to follow along or check it out later, you can. We're very proud and very excited of this. And I'd like to thank the entire team. Just about every single member of CIID worked on this, including past members. I saw a couple of you in the chat. Lots of people contributed to this toolkit over the years and to really thinking hard about the best way to do this work. Okay, so the steps of the toolkit, I'm going to talk very briefly about those, and then it looks like we're going to have plenty of time for our breakout rooms. So the first goal is defining the goals for integration. It's so important in the beginning of the process, before you start mapping, before you do anything, is to think about what is your goal for doing this. There can be many, many different reasons that states start a data integration project using Generate. There are states who have an SLDS grant, and that is a small part of that, and they're overhauling a large amount of their data system, and installing Generate is one piece of that. There are states where Generate is going to be an amazing solution for integrating their data, and it's sort of a smaller scope on the larger scale, rather than being a small piece of a large project. And that's okay, it doesn't matter, but a really important piece is defining your goal, deciding on the scope, and beginning to lay that plan out. So that's step one. And then in step two, based on all of those discussions you've had in your state, you'll actually create your project plan. We have a new tool, which we can email out at this time. It's not yet on the website, so it's a little bit like a sneak peek. We have a project planning tool that has tabs for each area of work, so that we have a tab for your data calendar. We have data stewards and sources, roles and responsibilities. So we'll dive into that a little bit more in a couple minutes. But steps 1 and 2 are those foundational pieces where you're doing your documentation, you're laying careful plans, and you're mitigating risk. You're getting ready for the actual meat of the Generate project, which is what lots of folks want to jump into, which is step 3, where you map your source data elements to CEDS and you do your data mapping. And then in step 4, where you actually get to install, generate, and create and perform your extract, transform, and load procedures, or ETLs. And steps 3 and 4 are ones that you get to dig into multiple times as you do different data collections. So you install, generate one time, but you're going to map and write your ETLs and validate your data for your discipline data. You're going to map, write your ETLs, and validate for child count, et cetera, et cetera. So 3 and 4 are iterative. And then step 5 is the last, but it also very, very important for sustainability, where you document all of the new data submission processes that have been created by adding generate and by needing to maintain your maps and needing to maintain your ETLs and conducting an after action review. We have after action reviews built throughout the toolkit, and it's so important to take an active role learning from how you're working and from lessons that you're learning along the way. So those are the 5 steps. Are there any questions that people want to put in the chat right now? Or did I miss anything for my team?
Not seeing any questions in the chat, and Lindsay, I
No
think
one's
you
typing?
covered at a very high level. So
Okay, great. So I think it's time for our breakout rooms. Travis is going to divide us up randomly, and then Darren and I will go into one room. Emily and Charlotte will go into the other room. We're going to spend, it looks like, I can't do math that fast. Travis will probably figure that out. We're going to spend a certain amount of time with you. And then what we'll do is switch rooms. So you all will stay still, and then you will get to learn about the second half of the toolkit, and you'll be able to ask questions and really dig in with us.
You got it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so step 1, I think I just have to hit my arrow. There we go. Okay, so the first task in step 1 is to develop a draft use case. I was talking about that in the last segment. It's so important to understand the why and to share with your stakeholders the why so that everybody understands, right? So you want everybody from the CIO to the special education director, lots of folks in the agency need to know, A, that this is happening, and B, why it's happening so that they buy in. Additionally, actually, all of step 1 and 2 are so important. Turnover in states. I'm sure if you've been in a state for more than a couple of years, a few colleagues have moved on. All of these tools that we're going to be talking about and all of this documentation and planning helps to onboard people so that when people come on, you have documents that you can share with them, and you have you can quickly get them up to speed, and they can start their work that much faster. The second part of this, we don't have a specific dedicated tool, but it's to assess your system architecture and readiness for the data integration project. So typically we do this with a technical assistance provider. We all sit down in a room or virtually, depending on what year it is, and map out on Visio or even on chart paper, what does that data system look like? Where are the sources? What does it look like currently? So doing sort of a current picture of the data system and then a future state so that everybody knows where we are and where we're going. It's so important to do this carefully. So as you move through the project, if things change or if things don't work out as you thought they did, you can look at that picture, adjust it, and everybody knows what's going on. All right. And all of these, the use case and the system architecture are building you towards your scope. So as you look at your architecture, if you realize that, oh gosh, and this is common in states, personnel is not sourced for us, we get it in the aggregate, we're not going to be able to put it in to generate, you can confirm that that is not a part of the scope of your project. So in this work, it's so important for your technical staff to be involved so that they can talk about the data sources and how they're set up and what are the needs for connecting them. We need to have our data experts in there understanding what is the impact going to be on their data sets and what their task is going to be. And we need to have somebody leading that work. It's always so important to have a strong project manager for every project. The tools that we have that accompany step one are the use case template. We have a self-assessment that states do. It's not pictured large in these steps, but it is in there when you dig into the toolkit. And then we have the scope tool so that you have these documents that you can share out with your stakeholders. Are there any questions on this?
Nothing in the chat so far, Linz.
Nothing? Okay, actually, I was able to open that up. All I had to do was click on it. Okay, I can move on to step two. Maybe. All right, so step two is so exciting, and I will bring up the tool in a minute, which is establishing the project plan and structures for data integration work. And we have one tool for that, the Data Integration Project Planner. And if you are in a state that has been working with us, you might have done our roles and responsibilities document previously in freestanding version, but now it's all together. And so the first piece is establishing those roles and responsibilities. Who is in charge for what? Who is a project manager? Who owns what data? Additionally, the data sources are an important piece of that, but sort of who is responsible for what? Who's going to be writing the ETLs? Who needs to validate the data? If there are people that need to validate the data who are not at the table, you may want to clue them in so they know ahead of time that something's going to be expected of them. The second piece of it is developing a communication plan. So you have identified your team, but you need to know how you're going to talk about it. How do you, how frequently is maybe there an update email? Are there team meetings weekly? Are they bi-weekly? Will there be in-person meetings with TA providers? What is the process for updating state leadership? You know, at what level do they need to be informed? So really talking those things through so that nobody's surprised in the end by anything that's happening. The third task is creating an IDEA Part B data calendar. Although Generate, you can submit any EdFax file, and it will be set up for any EdFax file. CIID concentrates specifically on special ed data or IDEA data. And so as you are working with your personnel data, your discipline data, your exiting data, it's important to know what else is going on for the special ed department. Are they up against an FPP APR deadline? Are they working on their LEA determinations? So that you can look at the workflow and the workload on each individual team member. You can also, if the EdFax coordinator has a crunch period during CSPR and they aren't going to be available for data validation, maybe don't schedule it that month. Things like that you can use to fill in this data calendar. And then finally, you've done so much work. You've talked to your team is cohesive, and you can write your project plan where you really get to start talking about, okay, who is doing the CEDS mapping and when are we installing Generate, and what needs to be done to install Generate? What are the preparatory moves? And so you calendar that all out. And that is all in one tidy tool. Would you guys like to see that tool? Okay. Great, Darren, I'll show it to you. Let me find it. There's my children. Okay. All right, so here is, tell me if this is too small. This is the Data Integration Project Planner. And a lot of our tools that we create, we leave them in Word or in Excel because every state works differently. I have a state that I'm working with right now that took the entire project planner and put it into Azure DevOps. And they're running it in sprints and they're tracking the work that way. So they took everything that we recommended. They took every step in the project plan, and here's the project plan. They took all of this information, which looks overwhelming. They chunked it out and put it so that we have it on the calendar for the rest of the year when we're going to be writing those ETLs, when we're going to be doing that data validation, etc. So we leave all of these so that they are adjustable for you, so that if you need to add in work or if something doesn't make sense. So say on this screen here, if your child count data comes from your vendor in aggregate and you're not going to be putting child count through generate, you can just delete those rows and get rid of them. That's totally fine. We want everything to work for the states in the way that it works. All right, so let's go back to the beginning, roles and responsibilities. We have some of the things filled in here where we have EdFax coordinator. So the person who maintains the project plan and coordinates work is not necessarily the EdFax coordinator. It might be, if that is your position in the agency, but also in some states, there is a specific person. I think that there's someone in this group, I can't see that chat anymore, who is a project manager. Oh, that was Marla. So it might be in a state that someone like Marla is in this position and not the EdFax coordinator. In CEDS, you might have somebody creating and maintaining your align maps. It might be the data governance coordinator, but it might be someone in IT, or it might be individual data stewards. It just depends on the structure of the state and particularly the size of the department. So I am not working with California, but I happen to know that they have an enormous education department. And so you might have a different person creating align maps for every single map because they have such a huge department and the positions are much more specialized. Whereas in a tiny state, like our friends in Montana or our friends in Oklahoma, you have people who are jacks of all trades and they do lots of things. They have a lot of stuff in their portfolio. So we have all of these tasks lined out and we have our subject matter experts. And sometimes it can be really surprising when you say, gosh, who does know the discipline data? Who really owns that data and who knows it? And then you say, oh gosh, we forgot to talk to that person. We should draw them in. We also have our data stewards and sources all mapped out with due dates, approximate due dates. A communication plan, as I was talking about, it's so important to think about when do you talk, who needs to know, when do you escalate an issue? If something goes wrong, say in setting up Generate and the person installing Generate is running into trouble, have they let the project manager know? Has the project manager let the head of IT know? I don't know what that chain might be, but it's very important to have escalation chains to know who needs to talk to whom when. Any questions or thoughts or observation on this work?
I do not see anything in the chat, Lindsay, but I just wanted to add, I know we're in the project planner now, and we just discussed a couple of tools and resources, including the use case template as well as the scope tool. And I just wanted to, I know there's a lot of moving pieces, kind of wanted to connect some things, at least how it helps me connect it. I used to be a special education teacher myself. We did something called WH questions. So like who, what, where, when, why, and then like including how. And the way I like to picture it is like the use case template is that is your why. Why are you engaging in this data integration effort? And then the scope tool kind of lays out the what and a little bit of the what and a little bit of the when. So we're talking timeline, we're talking file specs, and then this project planner encompasses, the who. It kind of encompasses all of it, honestly.
The how.
Yes, and the how. And I'm saying all this to say that those components change over time. These are all living documents. None of these are static. They should all be looked at as dynamic resources. And really just wanted to stress the importance, and I know everybody knows this, especially those who have worked at a state or currently work in a state, that, when those changes come, it's always nice to not have, it's best practice not to have a single point of failure. So there should be multiple people who are contributing to these documents, including the use case. So from the outset, making sure that there are the right individuals at the table so that this project, if it's not already off the ground in your state, so that it can get off the ground and, stay in flight, to keep the analogy going. But really just wanted to add that that these are things that can be and should be revisited over time so that, we can ensure that everybody's on the same page and that nothing gets lost in translation, because realizing and being sensitive to the fact that this isn't the only project that you have going on in states, right? There are competing priorities. That's always going to be a risk and one that these tools will help mitigate. So just wanted to add that. And thanks for putting that in the chat, Lindsay. I still do not see any questions.
Okay, because we're answering them all. Let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to do, I brought up the toolkit and I put it in the chat. If you all, I don't know if you might be scrolling through it on your own right now. Just a note that if you download the full toolkit, it will be the older version. We're working on 508 compliance as one big PDF for the entire toolkit that you could like print and put in a binder. But that is a little bit of a process. So if we look at step 1, I just want to show you how it works. You'll see lots of text and lots of explanations of the how and why things go. And you'll also find links. So we've been talking all about the use case, but at the bottom of each step, you'll get a link to the use case exercise and you can go right to it. So that it's sort of a tidy package. You can always find what you need. If you're going to be working with TA providers, they will be guiding you through this. But at the same time, the best case scenario is that a state is taking ownership of all of these documents, is taking ownership of moving through this toolkit. I think that kind of work lends itself to the state owning the project. The project will run better if the state is taking the lead rather than, say, a TA provider taking the lead. Is there anything else, any other part of the toolkit of steps 1 and 2 you'd like to look at right now?
Or if there are any questions regarding these steps or any changes. Again, Lindsay kind of went over it in the high level when we were all in the main room, but we kind of consolidated a lot of the steps here and wanted to lay it out a little bit more eloquently. So I personally am very excited about this new toolkit, especially the fact that it was able to get published before we had this webinar. So, but please feel free to drop anything in the chat.
I think you guys can tell how excited this team is about this toolkit. All right, I'll have us look at step 2 and we can look at the project plan. So here, again, step 2 has 4 pieces. There's actually 5 tabs in that project planner. It didn't work out perfectly, but you'll just work through each of them. And then as you're doing your project, you may sort of do one meeting for each of these. Actually, let's do this. Does anybody, maybe we can do a show of hands if your state is considering installing Generate. If you want to share in the chat, sort of, maybe, so you can show your hand if you're considering or if you're actively working in Generate, or if you want to share in the chat why you're here and sort of anything you wanted to learn today. All right, it looks like we have a hand. Is that Marla Swanby? I don't remember. I can't see all the names. A hand from Marla. Marla, do you want to share in the chat what state you're from? Oh, and Richard is from Kansas, who's actively using Generate. I hope, Richard, now that you guys are deep in, and I know we actually met with Kansas last 2 weeks ago in Chicago. And I'm hoping that as Kansas moves forward, you can continue to use the, and Marla. Perfect. So we've met with other members of your team. They got introduced to the toolkit, like the new version of the toolkit. And as you guys continue working, we're hoping that you all can reuse these steps, right? You've done the use case maybe a couple of years ago. You've had a project plan, but as you start on new sections, like it looks like Montana's doing child count, you guys can pull these tools and continue to use them. And so we're hoping that it becomes really useful for you.
And looking at the time, wanted to interject because I believe we are coming up on time. And Lindsay mentioned, I see there's still folks typing in the chat, so please feel free to ask your questions. We have another minute or so. But Lindsay mentioned in the main room, we are going to be the ones moving. So y'all are going to stay here and then learn about the other half of the toolkit, the remaining 3 steps from our other 2 facilitators. Just wanted to flag that as I take a look at the clock.
I didn't keep track of time. I didn't look at it.
And if there's by chance, we don't want to assume that everybody here is currently implementing Generate in their state. If you are on the fence, your state's considering it, you have any questions, please, we'll have our contact information at the end. But also, please feel free to reach out to, CIID TA or anybody, any one of us facilitators on the call. We'll get you pointed in the right direction.
And if you want a copy of the new project planner, which is not yet on the web, my email will be at the end. Actually, I'm going to put it right here. We'll send you a copy of it. It takes us a little while to get things through Department of Ed and 508 compliance. So everything didn't line up. The stars did not exactly align for these. All right, looks like we're getting yanked out. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
I'm going to go ahead and so you guys have heard about step 1, heard about step 2. So really organizing the who, the what, you've got an end in mind. And in step 3, we are starting to dive into the technical details, where we're really identifying those source documents, as well as the source systems and kind of the base data dictionary information that we need to use in order to get to the reporting that we've identified in our scope in steps 1 and 2. One of the things I just wanted to kind of quickly mention is if you have an existing governance process or documentation that your group already leverages, a data dictionary, a business rules requirements for federal reporting, that's a living document that gets used every year. You are not required, obviously, in the CIID toolkit it's not like you have to use our process for leveraging the ETL checklist as your data dictionary. You could absolutely leverage existing documentation. And I would encourage you to leverage any existing processes that you have to sort of fit this work into your existing governance structure rather than trying to create something new and different. The second thing I'll say is if you don't have a governance structure, right, your governance is maybe not cohesive or standardized across the organization. Take a look at what we propose for how to manage this and some of the documentation in the toolkit in step 3. And you could leverage that for more than just your IDEA reporting or more than just your EDFACS reporting even. So, that's something to consider. The specific tool that's really critical to step 3 is going to be the ETL checklist. So extract, load, extract, transform, load. Important to extract that, transform it, and then load it. That checklist is going to be the element to element information from your source data that's needed in order to create your files to the landing element in CEDS. So how do we get from your version of the first name to the CEDS version of the first name of a student? So there's a lot of technical details that potentially are in play. One example for first name is we had a state who their character allowance for their first names was longer than what was allowed in CEDS. We didn't think that there was any student that necessarily in that state had a name longer than what was allowable in CEDS. Turns out they did have one. And so that was a consideration they had to make. How are we going to either, shorten it, or how are we going to transform this name so that it fits, right? Or do we need to make a recommendation to CEDS to lengthen the space available in first name? Both of those things came out of an ETL checklist conversation. And those are the kinds of things that get documented, right? What transformation needs to happen from our data in order to meet the option sets that are in CEDS so that we can do our reporting. So the ETL checklist, let me pull that up. Here's an example of an ETL checklist. I know you can't see this very well, but there are many tabs along here. I think the most important tab in this checklist is the one that's called ETL. And essentially it has space for all of the source to generate information. So that's your source information is in all of these columns. You can see this is a pretty long space here. And then the next thing that is in an ETL checklist is going to be where in CEDS this element is found. What's the name of the element that we need and the definition, all the data type information, all sorts of details about that CEDS element, the ID, the alignment responses, other things that are part of the generate system are all to the right. So in that ETL checklist, everything to the left is used or entered in by the state. So this is really what are your options? What's the source of information to get us to this element of a male in a student file for special ed reporting? The other thing I'll just mention, and let's see if I can get this to pull up well, is the ETL checklists are all posted on the CIID website. For the ones that we have. So here they're on the CIID community site. We link to this within the toolkit, but here's where you find those actual checklists. So these Excel files that I was just referencing. So we were looking at the base IDEA checklist, but they exist here. The other thing you can do, of course, is along with working on your ETL checklist is you can actually leverage CEDS to do alignments. So that would typically be kind of a pre-process. If you don't have a data dictionary and you want to create one that's accessible to more than just yourself, maybe in a physical document, but you want something you can have available to maybe external stakeholders or others for your EdFacts reporting, like districts or schools or researchers. If you do that alignment work in CEDS, where you're basically uploading a data dictionary of your source elements and then aligning them to the CEDS elements, you can make that shareable and public in CEDS. And that website, the CEDS website, allows you to do that. It has tools to do that. We reference in the toolkit the CEDS instructions for how to do that. So we don't have our own explicit instructions. There's a whole bunch of information and videos you can watch on how to do that, and specifically on the CEDS site. So our toolkit references the existing guidance and training, if you will, on how to do how to do that step. I'm going to pause for a moment, have a moment of time. Any questions about step 3 before we move on? Anybody interested? I mean, I'm curious if there's any other feedback or comments about that? Okay, we'll go to step 4. So once you have sort of established your ETL checklist, so we've got the technical business rules, if you will, we're sort of ready to do the next more technical things, although these two things could be going at the same time, right? But installing the generate software. So our prior version of the ETL, of the toolkit did not contain kind of this explicit step about when you would install generate and how you would do that. This toolkit version does address that. And the reason we do that is because we think it's important and critical for the entire project team to know what high-level steps there are and things to consider when installing new software in a state environment or in your system, right? So ensuring that there's good kind of code management and database management procedures is something that we think is really valuable for a larger project, to ensure that they know what their IT team's processes are for doing that, and that there is something in place in order to maintain the future ETL code that you're going to develop as part of this work. And then there's the installation of generate, which actually we, again, we reference the existing documentation. So this is also on our CIID community site. There's a generate tab, and down at the bottom are all of our technical guides. So installation and configuration, the user guide, updates, configuration. So these are for the very technical steps that need to happen with all of the technical speak those documents live out here on our Generate site. And so the toolkit references that location specifically to sort of go through the step-by-step of how to install Generate. But it does, again, it gives that project team the overall resources to know if they had a more detailed question about that installation or a configuration component, it can point you to those resources. Next, we get into the write ETL code. So this is where there's actually, fingers to keyboard. ETL is actually being written to take the ETL checklist with the transformation information in it and using that as the business rules to actually move the data. There's another component in here that is not referenced in the earlier version of the toolkit, which again is a more technical step, but it's this information about the source system reference table. So that's a table we actually created to support the transformation of data from your source into the CEDS elements, but it has to be maintained. It's information that has to get updated every year or as any information in the source system changes. And so we included that in the toolkit because it was important to give the overall project team some knowledge about um, what needs to be done in terms of we need to ensure that there's some staff assigned that they know that this is their role and their job to update this table within the system if we have a source table change or if the EDFACS resulting file changes. Then we actually get to do the fun stuff. We're migrating the data. We walk through some steps on how to do that, and then what to do for the comparison of legacy data and resolve your data quality issues. So data quality issues that you are kind of going to go in this cycle of, if you identify a data quality issue after you've migrated the data, you need to go back to the ETL checklist, update anything that would be impacted by the change that you need to make in order to resolve that data quality issue at the same time that you're updating or even before you then update the actual ETL code. So we talk about the cycle that exists sort of here within task 2, that you might be repeating these steps over and over until you get to a point where your data quality issues are resolved. Right. And you're like, okay, now we have an ETL code that works right. It's pulling the right data. We're getting the right results. So then your ETL checklist documentation is sort of finalized and you've got a good code management process in place. So that ETL code gets saved as the final code that was used for that year for that reporting. And then another new task within this step and new to even the CIID toolkit is this after action review. So when you complete this first sort of task 4.2 for a particular file, and you're now at the point where you could produce your generate file, um, we are suggesting it's a good practice to go back and confer with the team and say, how did that go? What went well? What could we improve on? What do we want to try to change when we go to do the next file? So that's kind of the purpose of this after action review. It's a small after action activity that happens so that you can potentially learn from and make modifications to whatever the process is that you created, what process you do next, right? So maybe there wasn't enough communication between one IT person and the rest of the project team. How could we make that communication better? Do we need to have weekly emails that come out from the IT team about things that they've done this week? And that needs to happen in order to make this more efficient. Things like that, where we give some suggestions and we have an after action review agenda that is a tool that you can use to help find those good ideas. I'm going to pause for questions, suggestions, comments, reactions for step 4. We have just
We've gotten 2-minute warning, Emily, so
okay. I'm going to move into step 5 quickly. Just a quick overview. Step 5 is really about solidifying your documentation, right? You've gone through this great process. You have all these documents that you've created. So step 5 is like, what do we need to kind of put a bow on all of this project work, like tie all the documentation together? And so we created that specifically for special education reporting and specifically probably for Part B data managers mostly, also maybe SPED directors and EDFACS coordinators, but the IDEA Part B data submission organizer, which takes some of the critical components and timing, the calendar, if you will, of all things related to the needs of data for IDEA Part B data managers, and tried to give an overarching high-level overview of that to sort of say, here's places where projects might, where something we might have an issue because we don't have enough time, right? I'm doing all these things in this month. And so how do we kind of address those or pre-plan for those? Gives more of that higher level overview. Again, I would say it's something you could take and apply to any other program area. If you can create a calendar about the activities that that program area has, you could reuse this data submission organizer to be for any project data submission. And then we have an after action review that's more broadly for the entire project. So similar to the end of step 4, where we were doing one just for that particular ETL, we basically say, take a look at your overall generate installation and IDEA integration project, and what do you want to apply to future projects? So thank you all very much. I'm sorry we didn't have a lot of discussion. But appreciate you. And if you have questions, Lindsay, I'm sure we can talk a little bit in the big meeting here in just a minute.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
How'd it go?
Well, a little bit of technical difficulties in my first group.
Oh, shoot.
But second group, just a lot of content to get through. So good from my perspective, but not a lot of opportunity for discussion. So
shoot.
Maybe
Well,
we
we'll have to
have a moment.
All right, we'll have to stop talking over each other too. So I'd like to we have one more minute. Are there any observations that anybody else would like to share? Questions or experiences with any part of the toolkit that you want to shout out? Oh, I don't know if you can be off mute. You may have to type it in the chat in this main room. All right, my teacher waiting period is over. Now your teacher would wait until someone felt guilty enough. All right, so here on the screen is our Emily's and my email addresses. I put my email address in both chats in case somebody wants a copy of the project planner. Please do check out the toolkit. If you have a TA provider, get in contact with us and let us know if you want to talk through anything. And then we're going to move into the evaluation. All right, so we will have this link in the chat. Travis, are you ready to put that link into the chat? We'll ask that you fill out this, oh, there, Darren did it, evaluation form. It's just a short form, but it really informs us, and it holds CIID responsible for using taxpayer dollars, in truth, as we evaluate ourselves and our performance. All right, I think that's the end of it. So I will thank everybody so very much for giving us a very valuable hour of your day, and stay in touch. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, everyone.
Heather, we should probably get this recording out maybe next week. We have to sort of edit the various videos, and then we'll post them.
Thank you, everybody. Again, if you didn't have a chance to ask your questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Lindsay, Emily, myself, or CIID TA. We'd be happy to answer your question.